Now, there's a new industrial revolution taking place, and Australia may be left behind. With more industries becoming automated, future employment will require a greater knowledge of robotics and computerization. Well, research shows that up to 40% of Australian jobs today may be lost in the next 10 years due to technological advancement. So, is Australia ready for the next revolution? Well, to answer that question, we're joined by Warwick Smith, research economist with think tank Per Capita. Warwick, thanks so much for being with us. So explain to us, where do you place Australia in regards to technological innovation? Is it leading the sector, keeping up? Is it lagging behind?
Hi, Fawzia. Yeah, well, Australia does all right in terms of innovation. We tend to do pretty badly in terms of taking that into innovation and turning it into something that's marketable and that's produced by Australian companies. It's a mixed story, but that's a very small, I guess, potted answer to your question.
All right. Well, why is that then? Why is it that Australians are able to come up with innovation but then not be able to take it through to the final step?
Well, I think there's been a sort of tradition in Australia of counting on our old industries, so counting on mining and agriculture and, you know, the export of raw materials and production, agricultural production as the backbone of our economy. And the culture just hasn't really gotten there, and particularly in terms of taking risks with financing new companies. I think that's probably the biggest part of the answer.
Now, since the 1960s, Australia has been known as the lucky country. It's revelled in its good weather, a stable economy, relative safety. But has all that good fortune and isolation really made it complacent when it comes to innovation, as you say?
Well, yeah, I certainly think that's true, that we have become complacent. But it's also worth noting that the lucky country was said ironically. It was a warning, really, not so much that to be taken literally.
It was. Actually, I'll quote Donald Horne, who wrote The Lucky Country, saying, "I had in mind, when writing that phrase, in particular, the lack of innovation in Australian manufacturing and some other forms of Australian businesses." It looks like nothing much has changed since the 1960s.
Precisely. It's not a new story. But the thing that is new is that those traditional industries that Australia has flourished with are being challenged, and they're being challenged by computers and artificial intelligence. We already have mining processes that are largely automated with self-driving trucks and self-driving trains, and that same thing is happening in agriculture. Agriculture employs very few Australians these days, and mining, for its size of the economy, employs relatively few workers as well. And that trend is only set to continue and to spread to other industries.
Well, let's then look at the future employment, shall we? How would you rate Australia's current education system in terms of preparing today's kids for the future computerised workforce?
Yeah, well, I think we're clearly sliding. We know that. There's every international ranking that's done shows Australia slowly kind of dropping down the ranks. And in addition to that, we have quite a narrow focus in our education system on, you know, the traditional reading, writing and arithmetic. And then in higher education, we've progressively over previous decades become more narrowly focused on occupation specific education rather than really broad general education. And in both school and in tertiary education, we should be doing more in terms of training people in critical thinking and problem solving and teamwork and essentially in versatility, because there's not much point predicting too far into the future as to what skills are going to be required. Things are changing so fast, and you know, it's forecast that many of the people who are in school today will have several different occupations over the period of their life. So the skills that they really need is kind of that critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork.
Warwick, we are already seeing jobs going the automated way, as you say. It is, of course, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's cheaper, it's more efficient for businesses. What advice then would you give someone who may be facing the very scary prospect of losing their bread and butter to a computer system?
Yeah, I think it's actually a very difficult question, and I don't claim to sit here with all the answers, but there are some really important questions that we need to be asking, and a lot of the focus, as you just asked, is on, you know, young people in school and how we can prepare them for the future. But actually, we can reasonably expect young people to be quite versatile and to be capable of being, of doing extra training. I think the overlooked group in terms of automation and job loss are older Australians. And we already know that from past massive job losses that it's the people aged 50 plus, when they lose their jobs, the majority actually never work again when there's sort of broad scale layoffs in a particular industry. And they are also overrepresented, in fact, in Australia in many of the jobs that are under threat of automation, like driving.
All right, so anyone who may be watching this interview right now and who may just be in that particular case, what would you say to them? Would they need to take up a new skill? Would they need to go back to school?
Well, I think retraining is really important, but I actually think that the threat is on such a large scale that we really need to tackle it with government policy. And government policy and culture, actually. One of the key issues is how we treat the unemployed. Currently, we treat the unemployed punitively and punish them for basically being unemployed, even though there are fewer jobs than there are job seekers even now. We need to shift that mentality, I think. Rather than punishing the unemployed, we need to be supporting them and helping them to get training and doing more that understands that where they are is not their fault. As I said, there are more unemployed than there are jobs. So punishing them for not being in a job that doesn't exist is cruel, really. So I think that's an area we really need to change, is how we treat the unemployed and how well we support them. You really can't live on the dole at the moment in any sort of meaningful sense in Australia. And there are going to be more and more people who are on the dole either temporarily or potentially for quite a long time. And we need to think about how we treat those citizens.
Warwick, you certainly paint a very dismal picture for Australia in terms of innovation. But thank you so much for joining us on the show, Warwick.
Thank you. I hope it wasn't too pessimistic. I'm not as pessimistic as perhaps I sounded.
Thanks anyway.
Thank you.